The cleaning cart squeaked as Kim Dong-soo pushed it through the dark tunnels under New Seoul Station. The wheels needed oil, but nobody cared about fixing things down here. These tunnels were forgotten places where only maintenance workers went. Above his head he could hear the rumble of huge spaceships landing and taking off. The sound never stopped. Dong-soo was 62 years old and had been cleaning these same tunnels for almost 30 years. His back hurt from bending over mops and his hands were rough from cleaning chemicals. Most people never saw him. They walked past janitors like he was invisible. That was fine with him. He liked the quiet. The tunnels stretched for miles under the station. They were filled with pipes that carried water and air to the levels above. Thick cables ran along the walls, bringing power to shops and restaurants. Everything was painted dull gray and lit by cheap lights that buzzed and flickered. It was not a pretty place, but it was his workplace. Today felt different somehow. Dong-soo could not explain why. Maybe it was because he had not slept well last night. He kept thinking about his family. His wife and son had died in the war 5 years ago. A bomb had hit their transport ship while they were visiting the outer planets. Since then, he lived alone in a small apartment and worked every day to keep his mind busy. As he cleaned a section near the old air recycling machines, he heard something strange. It was a soft crying sound, like a baby or small animal in pain. Dong-soo stopped pushing his cart and listened carefully. The sound came again. It was definitely real. He followed the noise down a side tunnel he rarely used. The air was warmer here because of the heating pipes. At the end was a small space where old equipment was stored. The crying was coming from inside. Dong-soo turned on his flashlight and looked into the storage area. What he saw made him gasp. A small creature was curled up against the warm pipes. It had green scales that looked dull and sick. Tiny wings were folded against its back. Its long neck was barely strong enough to lift its head. Dong-soo had worked at the space station for decades. He had seen aliens from hundreds of different planets. He knew exactly what this creature was. It was a dragon baby. The dragons were one of the most powerful races in the galaxy. Their empire controlled thousands of star systems. A few months ago, the Imperial Dragon Fleet had passed through this system. Their huge ships had been beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Each ship was as big as a city and covered in gold decorations. The dragons were traveling to meet with human leaders about trade agreements. This little dragon must have gotten left behind somehow. Now it was dying alone in the dark tunnels. The baby dragon looked at Dong-soo with bright golden eyes. Even though it was small and weak, Dong-soo could see intelligence there. The creature was afraid but also hopeful. It was looking at him like he might be the answer to its prayers. Dong-soo knelt down slowly. He did not want to scare the little dragon. Its breathing was fast and shallow. He could see its ribs through its thin scales. The poor thing had not eaten in days, maybe weeks. "Hello there, little one," Dong-soo said quietly in Korean. Then he switched to Standard Galactic, the language most aliens understood. "I will not hurt you." The dragon baby made a soft chirping sound and tried to crawl closer to him. It was so weak it could barely move. Dong-soo gently reached out his hand. The dragon sniffed his fingers, then pressed its small snout against his palm. Its skin was burning hot with fever. Dong-soo looked at his lunch bag. Inside was his usual meal that his neighbor Mrs. Park had made for him. There was rice wrapped in seaweed, some pickled vegetables, and several pieces of grilled beef. His stomach was already rumbling because he had skipped breakfast to come to work early. But looking at the starving dragon baby, his decision was easy. The little creature needed food more than he did. He unwrapped one piece of meat and broke it into tiny bits. The dragon watched every movement with hungry eyes. When Dong-soo offered the first piece, the baby grabbed it with small claws and ate it quickly. It made happy chirping sounds as it chewed. Dong-soo gave the dragon all of his meat piece by piece. The creature ate everything eagerly. As it ate, its scales seemed to get a little brighter. The dullness of starvation was slowly fading away. Next, Dong-soo offered his water bottle. The dragon was so thirsty it drank almost everything. Water dripped from its small mouth as it finally lifted its head with more strength than before. "That is better," Dong-soo said softly. He gently touched the dragon's head. Its scales were smooth and warm. "You were very hungry?" The baby dragon looked up at him with those intelligent golden eyes. It made a sound that was almost like a cat purring, but deeper. The sound seemed to come from deep in its chest. Dong-soo had never heard anything like it before. As he sat there with the dragon, Dongsu realized he could not just leave it here. The little creature would die if he walked away. Even with the food he had given it, the dragon was still very sick and weak. It needed care and more food to get better. The smart thing would be to report this to station security. They would know what to do with a lost dragon baby. But Dongsu had a feeling that once the authorities got involved, he would never see the little dragon again. It would become someone else's problem. He thought about his empty apartment. Since his family died, he came home every day to silence. He ate dinner alone and watched old movies until he fell asleep. The loneliness was like a weight on his chest that never went away. Maybe they could help each other. The dragon needed someone to care for it. And maybe, just maybe, Dongsu needed something to care for too. His shift was almost over. The other maintenance workers would be going home soon. If he was careful, he could smuggle the dragon baby out without anyone seeing. Dongsu took off his spare work jacket and gently wrapped it around the small dragon. The creature did not fight or struggle. Instead, it snuggled into the warm fabric and closed its eyes. It seemed to trust him completely. "Come on, little friend," Dongsu whispered. "Let me take you somewhere safe." As he carried the dragon baby through the tunnels toward the exit, Dongsu had no idea that his simple act of kindness would soon change the entire galaxy. 2 weeks had passed since Dongsu brought the baby dragon home to his small apartment. Those 14 days had been the happiest he could remember in years. The little dragon, whom he had named Huan after his dead son, was growing stronger every day. When Dongsu first brought Huan home, the dragon was so weak it could barely lift its head. Now the little creature could fly short distances around the apartment. Its scales had changed from dull green to bright emerald that seemed to glow with inner light. Huan was about the size of a medium dog now, much bigger than the tiny thing Dongsu had found dying in the tunnels. The dragon was incredibly smart. Within just a few days, Huan learned to understand simple Korean words. When Dongsu said food, Huan would run to his feeding bowl. When he said sleep, the dragon would curl up on the old blanket Dongsu had given him. Most amazing of all, Huan seemed to understand Dongsu's feelings. On nights when Dongsu felt sad about his lost family, Huan would climb onto his lap and make that deep purring sound. The vibration was comforting, like having a warm living heating pad. The dragon's presence helped fill the terrible emptiness that had lived in Dongsu's chest since his wife and son died. Huan was also developing strange abilities that surprised Dongsu every day. The dragon always knew when Dongsu was coming home from work. Even before Dongsu reached the apartment building, Huan would position himself by the front door waiting. It was like the dragon could sense his approach from very far away. Even stranger, Huan seemed to understand technology in ways that should have been impossible for such a young creature. When Dongsu worked on his old computer, the dragon would watch with intense interest. Sometimes Huan would touch the screen with one small claw, and somehow the machine would work better afterward. Taking care of Huan was expensive. The dragon ate enormous amounts of food, especially meat and fish. Dongsu was spending his entire monthly salary feeding his new friend, but he did not mind. For the first time since his family died, he had a reason to hurry home after work. He had someone who was happy to see him. Every morning before work, Dongsu would prepare a large meal for Huan. The dragon loved grilled beef, but he also ate chicken, fish, and even some vegetables. Huan was very polite about eating. He never grabbed food or made messes. He would wait patiently until Dongsu put the bowl down, then eat carefully. In the evenings, Dongsu would teach Huan new words in Korean. The dragon was an eager student. He learned the names of everything in the apartment. He could understand commands like "come here" and "be quiet." Most impressive of all, Huan seemed to understand when Dongsu explained things to him. One evening, Dongsu was telling Huan about his work at the space station. He described the different alien species that passed through and the various types of spaceships that docked there. Huan listened with complete attention, his golden eyes never leaving Dongsu's face. "You know, little friend," Dongsu said, "someday your family might come looking for you. Dragons are important people in the galaxy. Someone must be worried about you." Huan made a soft sound that seemed almost sad. The dragon moved closer to Dongsu and rested his head on the man's knee. It was clear that Huan did not want to think about leaving. That night, everything changed. Dongsu was preparing dinner when his communication console began beeping loudly. The screen lit up with the symbol for an emergency broadcast. These announcements were rare and always meant something serious was happening. The message appeared in bright red letters, first in Standard Galactic, then in Korean, then in dozens of other languages. Urgent notice to all residents of New Seoul Station. The Imperial Dragon Fleet has returned to the system. They are conducting an immediate search for a missing member of the royal family. Any person who has information about a young dragon must report to station. Security at once. A reward of 1 million credits is offered for information leading to recovery. Dongsu felt his blood turn cold. He looked at Huan, who was staring at the screen with obvious understanding. The dragon's expression was calm, but Dongsu could see sadness in those golden eyes. "You are not just any baby dragon, are you?" Dongsu asked quietly. Huan walked slowly to Dongsu and placed one small clawed hand on his palm. Suddenly, Dongsu's mind filled with images and feelings that were not his own. He could somehow see Huan's memories and emotions directly. He saw the truth about Huan's identity. This was not just a dragon baby. This was Prince Yong-ho, the third son of the Dragon Emperor himself. The images showed Huan falling from a massive royal ship during some kind of accident. The little prince had been lost for months while his family searched the galaxy for him. Dongsu also felt Huan's emotions during those first terrible days. The fear of being alone and starving. The desperation as he grew weaker and weaker. And then the overwhelming gratitude when a kind human had found him and cared for him without asking for anything in return. But strongest of all, Dongsu felt Huan's current emotions. The young prince was terrified of returning to his old life. In dragon society, showing feelings was considered weakness. Royal children were raised by servants and teachers, not by loving parents. Huan had never experienced the kind of warm affection that Dongsu had given him. The mental connection faded, leaving Dongsu staring at the little dragon prince. Huan looked up at him with pleading eyes, as if asking Dongsu to make this problem disappear. Outside the apartment window, Dongsu could see lights in the sky. Ships were arriving. Many ships. The dragon fleet was already here, searching for their lost prince. Dongsu understood the situation perfectly. He had been caring for royalty without knowing it. Tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, the Dragon Emperor's forces would find them. They would take Huan away, back to a life of cold formality and royal duties. The question was, what would happen to a simple human janitor who had been harboring the Dragon Emperor's son for 2 weeks without reporting it? Would they see his kindness as a crime? Would they think he had kidnapped the prince? Dongsu looked at Huan, who was still watching him with those intelligent, worried eyes. Whatever happened next, Dongsu knew he could not regret saving this young life, even if it meant facing the anger of the most powerful being in the galaxy. "Do not worry, little prince," Dongsu said softly, gently stroking Huan's scales. "Whatever happens, I am glad I found you." Outside, more lights appeared in the sky as the Dragon Fleet prepared to search every corner of the space station. The morning sun could barely be seen through the massive shadows covering New Seoul Station. Dongsu looked out his small apartment window and felt his heart stop. The entire space around the station was filled with dragon ships. Hundreds of them floated in perfect formation, blocking out the stars. These were not ordinary ships. They looked like flying castles made of dark metal and covered in golden writing that seemed to glow with its own light. Each ship was enormous, bigger than most space stations Dongsu had ever seen. The largest one in the center was so huge it created its own shadow that covered half the station. Prince Yong-ho, still calling himself Huan in Dongsu's mind, sat quietly beside the window. The little dragon had grown much larger over the past 2 weeks, but he still liked to stay close to Dongsu. His emerald scales now had a special shine that marked him as royalty. Even though he was still young, there was something noble about the way he carried himself. "They have come for you," Dongsu said softly. Placing his hand on Huan's head, the dragon prince pressed closer to Dongsu. Through their mental connection, Huan shared his feelings. He was not afraid of his family. He was afraid of losing the first real friendship he had ever known. In dragon society, princes were taught that showing emotion was weak. Huan had been raised by servants who bowed and scraped but never showed him real care. Dongsu was the first being who had ever loved him just for being himself. A loud voice suddenly echoed through every speaker in the station. First it spoke in the ancient dragon language, which sounded like thunder and wind. Then it was translated into Standard Galactic. Citizens of New Sol Station. I am Emperor Daewung of the Dragon Empire. My son, Prince Yongho, is somewhere on this station. The human who has been keeping my child will come forward immediately. You will be brought before me to explain your actions. Resistance is not an option. The voice was filled with such power that the walls of the apartment seemed to shake. This was not a request. This was a command from someone who ruled over thousands of worlds and billions of beings. Dongsu could hear heavy footsteps in the corridors outside his apartment. Station security was moving through the residential areas, going door to door. With them were tall figures in golden armor. These had to be the Dragon Imperial Guards, the Emperor's personal soldiers. Dongsu could have tried to hide Huan, but he knew it would be useless. The dragons had technology beyond human understanding. They would find the prince eventually. More importantly, Dongsu realized that Huan needed to face his destiny, even if it meant they would be separated forever. Come on, little prince, Dongsu said gently, standing up from his chair. It is time to go home. Together they walked to the front door of the apartment. Dongsu was scared, but he tried not to show it. Huan needed him to be strong right now. When they opened the door, 3 Dragon Imperial Guards were waiting in the hallway. These dragons had taken human-like forms, but they were still over 8 feet tall. Their golden armor was covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. Their faces were stern and cold, like statues made of metal. The guard in front, who seemed to be their leader, stepped forward when he saw Dongsu and Huan. His eyes went wide when he noticed how close the prince stayed to the human janitor. Human, the guard said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. I am Commander Tae-hyun of the Imperial Guard. You will come with us to the Emperor's ship now. Dongsu nodded. I understand. As they walked through the station toward the docking bay, Dongsu got his first close look at the Dragon Imperial Guards. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single machine. Other people in the corridors pressed themselves against the walls and stared in fear and wonder. The shuttle that would take them to the Emperor's ship was waiting at the main docking bay. It was made of the same dark metal as the larger ships, and it hummed with barely contained energy. Inside, the seats were sized for beings much larger than humans. Dongsu felt like a child sitting in furniture made for giants. During the flight to the flagship, Dongsu caught glimpses of the Dragon Fleet's true size. There were hundreds of ships of every type he could imagine. Fast attack vessels darted between massive battleships. Transport ships the size of cities carried supplies and troops. In the center of it all was the Emperor's flagship, a ship so large it had its own gravity and atmosphere. Prince Yongho stayed pressed against Dongsu's side throughout the journey. The other guards watched this with obvious confusion. Royal dragons were not supposed to show attachment to anyone, especially not to humans. When their shuttle docked with the flagship, Dongsu was amazed by what he saw. The corridors were lined with crystals that gave off soft, natural light. The walls were covered in carvings that seemed to tell stories of great battles and ancient history. Everything was built on a scale that made humans feel tiny and insignificant. As they walked deeper into the ship, Dongsu could feel the weight of ages pressing down on him. This ship had traveled between stars for thousands of years. It had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. And somewhere in its heart sat the Emperor who ruled over it all. Commander Tae-hyun led them through corridor after corridor, each one more magnificent than the last. They passed other dragons in both their natural forms and human-like shapes. All of them stopped to stare at the human who had somehow gained the trust of a royal prince. Finally, they reached a set of doors that were easily 50 feet tall. They were made of some kind of black metal, and covered in golden symbols that seemed to move when Dongsu was not looking directly at them. Beyond these doors, Commander Tae-hyun said, is the throne room of Emperor Daewung. You will kneel when you enter. You will speak only when spoken to. You will show proper respect to the ruler of the Dragon Empire. The commander paused and looked down at Dongsu with something that might have been pity. Human, you have cared for our prince for many days. The Emperor knows this, but you have also kept royal blood from returning to its proper place. The Emperor knows this too. Your fate will depend on how well you can explain your actions. The massive doors began to open with a sound like distant thunder. Beyond them lay a chamber so vast that Dongsu could not see the far end. Lights floated in the air like captured stars. And at the center, on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single piece of crystal, sat a being of such power that reality itself seemed to bend around him, Emperor Daewung, ruler of the Dragon Empire, master of 1,000 worlds, was waiting to meet the human janitor who had fed his son. Prince Yong-ho took a deep breath and began walking toward his father. Dong-su followed, each step taking him deeper into a confrontation that would determine not just his own fate, but possibly the future of human-dragon relations throughout the galaxy. The throne room doors closed behind them with a sound like the end of the world. The Dragon Emperor's throne room was beyond anything Dong-su could have imagined. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered with crystals that contained tiny swirling galaxies. Each crystal held a different star system that belonged to the Dragon Empire. There were thousands of them, representing the vast reaches of space under dragon control. At the center of this impossible room stood a throne that seemed to float in the air without any support. It was carved from a single piece of crystal that changed colors as the light hit it, and sitting on that throne was Emperor Daewung himself. The emperor was ancient beyond human understanding. His massive dragon form combined the grace of Eastern dragons with something far more powerful and terrifying. His scales were deep gold traced with lines of silver that seemed to move like living things. His eyes were the most frightening part. They held the weight of thousands of years and the power to destroy entire planets. When the emperor spoke, his voice did not just fill the air. It seemed to speak directly into Dong-su's mind, making his bones vibrate with each word. "Kneel, human," the emperor commanded. Dong-su dropped to his knees immediately, but Prince Yong-ho remained standing beside him. This was clearly against all rules of dragon society. Murmurs of shock rippled through the hundreds of court officials who filled the throne room. "Rise, Kim Dong-su," the emperor said after a long moment. "I would look upon the being who has harbored my son." Dong-su stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The emperor studied him with those terrible ancient eyes. Dong-su felt like he was being examined down to his very soul. "Kim Dong-su," the emperor said, somehow knowing his full name without being told. "Janitor of New Seoul Station, widower, father to a son lost in the Outer Rim conflicts. You found my child dying in the tunnels beneath the station. You chose to save him, knowing nothing of his identity or the reward that might come from such an act." The emperor's voice carried a strange tone. It was not anger exactly, but something like deep curiosity. "Tell me, human, why did you risk everything for a creature you had never seen before? Why did you give your food to a being that was nothing to you?" Dong-su felt hundreds of eyes watching him. Dragons in their natural forms towered over smaller beings from dozens of different species. Court officials whose races he could not even identify waited to hear his answer. These were beings of power and ancient bloodlines, creatures who commanded fleets and ruled over entire worlds. But when Dong-su spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "Your Majesty," he said, "I saw a child who was hungry and afraid. That was all that mattered to me." The court erupted in whispers and gasps. Such a simple answer in the face of imperial questioning was either complete foolishness or profound wisdom. Emperor Daewung leaned forward on his crystal throne. "You fed him your own food. You took him to your home. You spent your wages caring for him. You asked for nothing in return. This is not typical behavior for humans from what I understand of your species." "With respect, Your Majesty," Dong-su replied, "I think you might not know humans as well as you believe. Many of my people would have done the same thing." A dangerous silence fell over the throne room. The emperor's eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You dare to suggest that I am ignorant about lesser species?" the emperor asked, his voice carrying the promise of terrible consequences. Before Dong-su could answer, Prince Yong-ho suddenly stepped forward. He placed himself directly between his father and Dong-su, his small form somehow radiating dignity and determination. "Father," Prince Yong-ho said, speaking for the first time since entering the throne room, "Kim Dong-su speaks the truth. He showed me kindness without conditions. He protected me without asking for payment. He loved me without expecting anything in return. He treated me not as a prince to be honored or a burden to be tolerated, but as a living being who deserved care simply because I existed." The court fell completely silent. What the young prince was saying challenged everything dragon society believed about power and relationships. Prince Yong-ho continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "In our empire, we demand respect through strength and obedience through fear. This human gave me something our people have forgotten how to give. He gave me compassion that was freely chosen, not commanded." Emperor Daewon stared at his son with growing amazement. In just a few weeks with this human, Prince Yang-ho had developed a strength of character and wisdom that years of royal education had failed to create. "My son," the emperor said slowly, "you speak of compassion as if it were a strength rather than a weakness." "It is the greatest strength I have ever seen, father," Prince Yang-ho replied. "When I was dying, forgotten and alone in the dark, Kim Dong-soo could have walked past me. No one would have blamed him. No one would have even known. Instead, he chose to sacrifice his own comfort for a stranger. That is not weakness. That is the power to choose goodness when goodness is difficult." The emperor rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the entire chamber. As he moved, the air around him seemed to shimmer and bend. This was a being who could reshape reality with his will, who commanded forces that could move stars. He descended from his floating throne platform, each step causing small tremors in the crystal floor. He approached Dong-soo, who stood his ground despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "Kim Dong-soo," the emperor said, his voice now carrying a different quality. It was no longer the commanding tone of absolute authority, but something closer to genuine curiosity. "My son believes you have taught him valuable lessons about the nature of strength. Tell me, what would you teach an emperor?" Dong-soo looked up at the being who could destroy planets with a thought, who commanded fleets that spanned the galaxy, whose word was law on 1,000 worlds. Then he looked at Prince Yang-ho, who was watching him with hopeful, trusting eyes. "Your Majesty," Dong-soo said carefully, choosing his words with great care, "I am not wise enough to teach emperors. I am just a simple man who cleans floors and fixes broken things. But I have learned one thing in my life. The measure of true strength is not in what we can take from others, but in what we choose to give. Your son was not strong because he was born a prince. He became strong because he chose to trust someone who showed him kindness." The emperor studied Dong-soo for a long, tense moment. Around the throne room, court officials held their breath, waiting to see how their ruler would respond to such words. "You suggest," the emperor said slowly, "that power without compassion is somehow incomplete." "I suggest," Dong-soo replied, meeting those ancient eyes without flinching, "that power combined with compassion becomes truly unstoppable." The words hung in the air of the vast throne room like a challenge to everything the Dragon Empire had believed for thousands of years. The tension in the throne room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Court officials shifted nervously as Emperor Daewon considered Dong-soo's words. Nobody had ever spoken to the emperor this way before. Some of the dragons looked angry that a human janitor would dare challenge their ruler's understanding of power. "Compassion," the emperor repeated slowly, as if the word was foreign to him. "You speak of this quality as if it were a strength rather than weakness that makes rulers soft and ineffective." Prince Yang-ho's scales brightened with courage as he looked up at his father. "It is the greatest strength I have witnessed, father. When I was dying in those dark tunnels, forgotten and alone, Kim Dong-soo could have ignored me. He could have reported me to authorities and collected a reward. Instead, he gave me his own food and took me to his home. That choice required more strength than conquering a planet." The emperor rose from his throne and began to change. His massive dragon form shimmered and condensed, taking on a shape that was more human-like but still radiated immense power. In this new form, he appeared as a tall man with silver hair and eyes that still held the depth of space itself. "Show me," the emperor said simply. The word surprised everyone in the throne room. "Your Majesty?" Commander Taehyun asked, confusion clear in his voice. "I want to see this compassion in action," Emperor Daewon explained. "If my son believes this human possesses wisdom worth learning, then I will observe it myself." The emperor turned to address his court. "We will return to New Seoul Station, not as conquerors demanding tribute, but as observers seeking to understand. I want to see how this janitor lives and works. I want to understand what taught my son these new ideas about strength." The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled court. Dragons did not observe lesser species. Dragons commanded and ruled from above. The idea of an emperor working alongside a human was unthinkable. But Emperor Daewon had made his decision. Within hours, he had selected a small group of trusted advisors and guards to accompany him back to the station. For the first time in the Dragon Empire's long history, an emperor would walk among humans as an equal rather than a superior. Station Administrator Li Hai-jin nearly collapsed when she was told that the Dragon Emperor himself wanted to visit her facility. She had spent her entire career managing the station and had never dealt with anything more important than trade disputes. Now she was expected to host the most powerful being in the galaxy. Dong-su helped make the arrangements. He explained to the terrified administrator that the Emperor wanted to be treated like an ordinary visitor, though his true nature would be impossible to completely hide. "Just let him see how we really live and work," Dong-su advised. "Do not try to impress him with fake displays. He wants to understand truth, not performance." For 3 days, something unprecedented happened in the galaxy. The Emperor of the Dragons worked alongside a human janitor in the maintenance tunnels of New Seoul Station. They started in the same tunnels where Dong-su had first found Prince Young-ho. The Emperor examined the hidden spaces beneath the station with growing interest. These were the forgotten areas where the real work of keeping the massive facility running happened every day. The Emperor met Park Sung-min, an elderly maintenance worker who had been repairing atmospheric systems for 40 years. Park had never received recognition or praise for his work, but without him, thousands of people would not be able to breathe clean air. This individual labors without glory or recognition, the Emperor observed as they watched Park skillfully repair a complex filtration system. "Glory is not what drives him," Dong-su replied while helping to hold a heavy component in place. "He works because someone needs to do this job, and because his work helps other people live safely." The Emperor, who had never performed manual labor in his thousands of years of existence, found himself strangely satisfied by the physical work. There was something honest about fixing broken machines with his own hands. There was something real about sweat and effort producing visible results. On the second day, they met security guard Choi Min-ji, who was working extra shifts to support her children after her husband died in a transport accident. She patrolled the lower levels where most people were afraid to go, keeping families safe from criminals and accidents. She could request an easier assignment, the Emperor noted as they watched Min-ji help an injured worker get to the medical bay. "She could," Dong-su agreed. "But she knows the families down here need protection and she is good at her job. She chooses to stay where she can do the most good." The Emperor was beginning to understand something that no amount of royal education had taught him. These humans worked not because they were forced to, but because they chose to care about each other's welfare. On the third day, they encountered medical technician Bae Woo-jin, who treated injured workers with limited supplies because proper medical equipment was reserved for higher-level personnel. Woo-jin made sure that everyone received care, regardless of their social status or ability to pay. These beings help each other without thought of reward, the Emperor said as they watched Woo-jin carefully bandage a maintenance worker's injured hand. "That is what makes them strong," Dong-su replied. "They understand that helping others makes everyone safer and happier." That afternoon, a crisis occurred that would test everything the Emperor was learning. A massive cargo transport suffered a catastrophic malfunction while docking with the station. Toxic chemicals spilled into the main air circulation system, threatening thousands of residents in the lower levels. The official response was to evacuate the affected areas and wait for specialized cleanup teams from the core worlds. This would take several days, but Dong-su knew that poisonous fumes were already seeping into the residential areas where poor families lived. Children and elderly people would be the first to suffer and die, while bureaucrats followed safety protocols. Without hesitation, Dong-su began organizing the maintenance workers he had known for decades. They had dealt with emergencies before, using creativity and determination to solve problems that expensive equipment could not fix. The Emperor watched in amazement as this small group of ordinary humans transformed into an efficient rescue team. Park Sung-min designed a containment system from spare parts. Choi Min-ji coordinated evacuation routes that prevented panic. Bae Woo-jin set up emergency medical treatment for anyone affected by chemical exposure. And Dong-su, without any thought for his own safety, prepared to enter the contaminated areas to manually shut down the compromised air systems. "You could die down there," the Emperor said, genuinely concerned for the human who had taught him so much. People will definitely die if I do not try, Dongsu replied simply. That makes the choice easy. As Dongsu descended into the toxic environment wearing improvised protection equipment, Emperor Dai Wung finally understood what his son had been trying to tell him. This was not weakness. This was strength of a kind that could not be conquered or commanded. It had to be freely chosen, and it was more powerful than any weapon in the Dragon Fleet. Dongsu woke up in the station's medical bay with the worst headache of his life. His throat burned and his lungs felt like they were on fire. The last thing he remembered was crawling through the contaminated tunnels, trying to reach the emergency shut-off valves before his makeshift breathing mask failed completely. Emperor Daewung was sitting in a chair beside his bed, still in his human-like form but looking more worried than an all-powerful ruler should. Prince Young-ho was curled up on another chair, refusing to leave during the 12 hours Dongsu had been unconscious. The chemical leak has been stopped, the Emperor said, without any introduction. Your plan worked perfectly. The toxic fumes have been cleared, and the air is safe to breathe again. You saved approximately 3,000 lives, including many children and elderly people. Dongsu tried to sit up, but his body felt weak and shaky. The Emperor gently pressed him back down onto the bed. Rest, Kim Dongsu. You breathed enough poison to kill most beings twice your size. The doctors say you will recover, but it will take time. What about the others? Dongsu asked, his voice barely a whisper. Park Sung-min, Choi Min-ji, Bae Woo-jin. Are they safe? All safe, the Emperor assured him. They are being praised as heroes by the station administration. Park Sung-min has been offered a promotion to Chief Maintenance Engineer. Choi Min-ji is being recruited by station security as their new head of emergency response. Bae Woo-jin has received job offers from medical facilities on 3 different core worlds. The Emperor paused and looked directly into Dongsu's eyes. They all refused to take credit for the rescue. Every single one of them insisted that you were the real hero, that they were simply following your leadership. Dongsu shook his head weakly. That is not true. They would have saved those people with or without me. Good people like that just need someone to help them organize their courage. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what he had witnessed. In my empire, such a crisis would have been handled through established procedures. The chemical leak would have been contained eventually, but thousands would have died while we followed proper protocols and waited for the right equipment. You and your colleagues saved those lives because you refused to accept that some people were less important than others. Prince Yongho stirred and opened his golden eyes. When he saw that Dongsu was awake, the young dragon's relief was obvious. He moved closer to the bed and gently touched Dongsu's hand with his small claw. I was scared you would not wake up, Prince Yongho said softly. When they brought you out of those tunnels, you were not breathing properly. I am fine, little prince, Dongsu said, managing a weak smile. It takes more than some bad air to stop an old janitor. Emperor Daewung stood up and faced both of them. I have made a decision that will change the Dragon Empire forever. We have grown powerful through conquest and control, but we have forgotten the strength that comes from compassion and cooperation. He looked directly at Dongsu. Kim Dongsu, I offer you a position as special advisor to the Dragon Throne. Your title will be Keeper of Perspectives, and your responsibility will be to ensure that the Empire never forgets the lessons you have taught us. Dongsu was shocked into silence. Your Majesty, I am just a janitor. I know nothing about running an empire or dealing with politics. That is exactly why your perspective is so valuable, the Emperor replied. You see individual people where we see masses of subjects. You see potential solutions where we see bureaucratic procedures. You see what really matters where we see what we think should matter. Prince Yongho moved closer to Dongsu's bedside. Please say yes, he said simply. I still have so much to learn from you about what it means to be truly strong. The Emperor's expression became gentler as he watched the bond between his son and the human who had saved him. There is another matter to discuss. Prince Yongho has requested permission to spend part of each year here on New Seoul Station, learning what it means to live among beings who choose kindness over power. I am inclined to grant this request. Dongsu looked at the young dragon prince who had brought unexpected joy back into his lonely life. Then he looked at the ancient emperor who was offering him a chance to help bring positive change to an entire galactic empire. I accept your offer, Your Majesty, Dongsu said quietly. But I have one condition. The emperor raised an eyebrow. It had been thousands of years since anyone had dared to place conditions on imperial offers. I want to establish exchange programs between our peoples, Dongsu continued. Dragon youth should learn alongside human children, and human students should study with young dragons, not as rulers and subjects, but as equals trying to understand each other. Emperor Daewung considered this request carefully. You want our children to learn from each other? I want them to become friends, Dongsu said. Fear and misunderstanding come from not knowing each other. Friendship comes from shared experiences and mutual respect. The emperor smiled, an expression that completely transformed his features. Agreed. Let it be announced throughout the empire that true strength comes not from standing above others, but from lifting others up alongside ourselves. As news of this agreement spread throughout the Dragon Fleet and beyond, something unprecedented began to happen across the galaxy. The rigid divisions between species that had existed for millennia began to soften. The Dragon Empire, the most powerful force in known space, had publicly acknowledged that they had valuable lessons to learn from a human janitor who had shown kindness to a lost child. The foundations of galactic civilization had been quietly but permanently shifted by a simple act of compassion in a forgotten maintenance tunnel. Emperor Daewung looked out the medical bay window at his fleet of ships. Tomorrow we begin the journey back to the Dragon capital. You will come with us, Kim Dongsu, to help us design a new kind of empire, one built on the strength you have shown us. Dongsu nodded, still hardly believing that his life had changed so dramatically. What kind of strength is that, Your Majesty? The strength to care for others even when it costs us something important. The strength to choose compassion when compassion is difficult. The strength to see every being as worthy of kindness, regardless of their species or social position. Prince Yongho settled down beside Dongsu's bed, purring softly. The sound was comforting and familiar, reminding Dongsu that some of the most important changes in the universe could begin with the simplest gestures of love. 6 months had passed since Dongsu accepted his position as Keeper of Perspectives in the Dragon Empire. His life had changed in ways he could never have imagined when he was just a lonely janitor, cleaning tunnels beneath New Sol Station. The Dragon capital world was a place of incredible beauty. Cities floated among the clouds, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Gardens filled with plants from 1,000. Different worlds created a harmony of colors and scents that took Dongsu's breath away every morning when he walked to his new office. His office was in the Imperial Palace itself, a building so large it could house an entire human city. Dongsu's workspace was modest by dragon standards, but it had a window that looked out over the capital's main plaza. Every day he could see dragons and humans working together, something that would have been impossible just months before. The exchange programs had begun immediately after the Emperor's announcement. Young dragons were learning in human schools across the galaxy, while human children studied in dragon academies. The results were better than anyone had hoped. Children who learned together grew up seeing each other as friends rather than aliens. Prince Yongho had kept his promise to spend time on New Sol Station. He divided his year between the Dragon capital and the space station, learning both sides of his heritage. The young prince was growing into a leader unlike any in dragon history, combining the traditional strength of his people with the compassion he had learned from Dongsu. On this particular morning, Dongsu was reviewing reports from the exchange programs when his communication console chimed. The message was from Commander Taehyun, who had become a close friend despite their very different backgrounds. Dongsu, please come to the main conference room immediately. The Emperor wants to discuss the situation in the Outer Rim territories. Dongsu made his way through the palace corridors, still amazed by the artwork and architecture around him. Dragons had been creating beautiful things for thousands of years, but now their art was beginning to include human influences. The mixture of styles was creating something entirely new and wonderful. The main conference room was filled with the Empire's top officials. Dragons in both their natural and human-like forms sat alongside human advisors who had been recruited from across the galaxy. At the head of the table sat Emperor Daewung, his presence still commanding but no longer intimidating to Dongsu. "Ah, Keeper of Perspectives," the Emperor said with genuine warmth. "Please take your seat. We have been discussing the rebellion in the Outer Rim systems." Dongsu had been following this situation closely. Several star systems had declared independence from the Empire, claiming that dragon rule was oppressive and unfair. In the old days, such rebellion would have been crushed with overwhelming military force. The traditional response would be to send the fleet and retake the systems by force, said Admiral Kang Min-ho, one of the Dragon military commanders. We have the power to end this rebellion in a matter of days. And create martyrs who will inspire future rebellions, countered Dr. Sarah Chen, a human political advisor. Military action will only prove to the rebels that we have not really changed. Emperor Dai-Wung turned to Dongsu. What do you think, my friend? How should we handle beings who reject our authority? Dongsu had been thinking about this problem for weeks. Your Majesty, may I ask why these systems want independence? What are their specific complaints against the Empire? They claim we tax them too heavily and give them no voice in decisions that affect their lives, Admiral Min-ho replied dismissively. Standard complaints from ungrateful subjects. Perhaps, Dongsu said carefully, we should listen to their complaints instead of dismissing them. If their concerns are valid, maybe we can address them without anyone having to die. The room fell silent. The idea of negotiating with rebels was completely foreign to Dragon thinking. You suggest we show weakness by admitting we might be wrong? Admiral Min-ho asked. I suggest we show strength by being willing to change when change is needed, Dongsu replied. The strongest leaders are those who can admit mistakes and improve. Emperor Daewon leaned back in his chair, considering. What do you propose? Send a delegation to meet with the rebel leaders, Dongsu said. Not to demand surrender, but to listen to their concerns. Take representatives from both Dragon and human worlds. Show them that the Empire has changed and is willing to continue changing. Prince Yong-ho, who had been quietly listening from his seat near his father, suddenly spoke up. I volunteer to lead this delegation. The room erupted in concerned voices. The idea of sending the heir to the throne into rebel territory was shocking. Absolutely not, Admiral Min-ho said firmly. It is far too dangerous. That is exactly why I should go, Prince Yong-ho replied with calm determination. If we are not willing to risk something important for peace, how can we ask others to trust us? Emperor Daewon studied his son with obvious pride. You have learned well from your teacher. Very well. You will lead a diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim, but you will not go alone. Kim Dong-su will accompany you. Over the following weeks, the delegation was carefully assembled. It included dragons and humans, military officers and civilians, young and old. Most importantly, it included beings who had lived in the Outer Rim and understood the challenges those systems faced. The journey to the rebel territory took several days. During the trip, Dong-su spent time talking with each member of the delegation, helping them understand that their goal was not to impose dragon will, but to find solutions that worked for everyone. When they arrived at the main rebel system, they were met with suspicion and hostility. The rebel leaders had expected military ships and demands for surrender. Instead, they found a small diplomatic vessel carrying beings who wanted to talk. The negotiations were difficult. Years of mistrust and anger could not be erased in a few conversations. But slowly progress was made. The rebels had legitimate complaints about taxation and representation. The Empire had valid concerns about maintaining order and unity across vast distances. Prince Yong-ho surprised everyone with his skill as a negotiator. He listened more than he spoke, acknowledged the rebels' concerns as valid, and worked to find compromises that addressed everyone's needs. After 2 weeks of talks, an agreement was reached. The Outer Rim systems would remain part of the Empire, but with much greater self-governance. They would pay reduced taxes in exchange for handling more of their own defense and administration. Most importantly, they would have representatives in the Imperial Council who could vote on policies that affected them. When news of the peaceful resolution reached the Dragon capital, it sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Dragon Empire had negotiated with rebels instead of crushing them. They had admitted that their old ways needed improvement. They had chosen compromise over conquest. But the most significant change was still to come. Standing before the Imperial Council 6 months later, Emperor Daewon made an announcement that would be remembered for thousands of years. The Dragon Empire has learned much in recent months, he began. We have discovered that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to build. Not from the ability to conquer, but from the courage to care. He paused and looked at Dong-su, who was sitting in the front row with Prince Yong-ho beside him. A simple janitor once taught us that the measure of greatness is not what we can take from others, but what we choose to give. Today, we give the greatest gift we can offer to the galaxy, The Emperor took a deep breath before continuing. Effective immediately, the Dragon Empire will be reorganized as the Galactic Federation. Every member system will have a voice in its governance. Every species will be treated as equal partners rather than subjects. Military force will be used only for defense, never for conquest. The applause that followed seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Dragons and humans, beings from dozens of different worlds, all celebrating the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. Later that evening, Dongsu stood on his balcony looking out over the capital city. The lights of celebration still twinkled in the streets below. Prince Yong-ho joined him, now grown almost to adult size but still preferring to spend quiet moments with his first and dearest friend. "Do you think we have really changed things?" the young prince asked. Dongsu smiled and placed his hand on Yong-ho's scaled head, just as he had when the dragon was a starving hatchling in a dark tunnel. "Look around you," Dongsu said softly. "Dragons and humans working together, former enemies becoming partners, children growing up seeing cooperation instead of conquest as normal. Yes, little prince, I think we have changed everything." Prince Yong-ho purred softly, the sound carrying across the balcony like a promise of better times to come. In the years that followed, historians would write countless books about the great transformation that brought peace and cooperation to the galaxy. They would analyze the political changes and study the military reforms. They would examine the economic benefits and cultural exchanges. But they would always begin their histories with the same simple story. Once upon a time, in a maintenance tunnel beneath a space station, a lonely janitor found a hungry child. He shared his lunch,